When did you realize the person everyone warned you about was trying to protect you? I was 8 when Uncle Damon moved into our basement. Mom warned me to stay away from him. Dad locked the liquor cabinet and hid his prescription bottles. My older brother started sleeping with a baseball bat under his bed. Everyone in our family whispered about Uncle Damon, how he'd been in and out of prison, how he had anger issues and couldn't hold a job, how he scared away every girlfriend with his violent temper. The aunts would lower their voices when he walked into rooms. Cousins weren't allowed to stay overnight anymore. But Uncle Damon never seemed dangerous to me. He fixed my bike chain when Dad was too busy. He taught me card tricks and let me win at poker using stale crackers as chips. When kids at school made fun of my thick glasses, he told me intelligence was more valuable than popularity. He was the only adult who actually listened when I talked about wanting to be a scientist. Still, I kept my distance like everyone said. The warnings intensified when I turned 14. Mom pulled me aside after Uncle Damon helped me with algebra homework. "Stay away from him," she said, her voice tight with worry. "He's not safe to be around." I nodded but didn't understand. He'd never raised his voice at me, never made me uncomfortable. The most violent thing I'd seen him do was aggressively flip pancakes when they stuck to the pan. My friends' parents would get that look when they heard his name. Teachers at school conferences would whisper to Mom about keeping troubled family members away from children. The mailman started leaving packages on the porch instead of ringing the doorbell after Uncle Damon answered the door, once wearing a wife beater with tattoos visible. Everyone acted like he was a loaded gun waiting to go off. But I watched him rescue a kitten from a storm drain, crying when he thought no one was looking. I saw him secretly pay for groceries when Mom couldn't afford them. He never asked for credit or recognition. He just quietly made things better. The contradictions drove me crazy. At family gatherings, Uncle Damon would sit in corners observing. He never joined conversations but always seemed to be listening. When my cousin's boyfriend started getting aggressive after too many beers, Uncle Damon appeared beside him like smoke. The boyfriend sobered up instantly and left without another word. Nobody talked about it afterward. When I was 9, our neighbor Mr. Chen started acting strange around me. He'd watch me from his window when I played in the yard. He'd offer me candy when my parents weren't looking. He'd ask personal questions about my schedule and my favorite places to go. My parents were oblivious. They thought Mr. Chen was just being friendly. Uncle Damon noticed immediately. One afternoon, Mr. Chen approached me while I was waiting for the school bus. He had this weird smile and kept trying to get me to come closer to his car. Said he had something special to show me. I was scared but didn't know why. That's when Uncle Damon appeared out of nowhere. He didn't say a word to Mr. Chen, just stood between us, staring. Mr. Chen's face went white. He mumbled something about being late for work and drove away so fast his tires squealed. Later that week, Mr. Chen moved out suddenly, just packed up in the middle of the night and disappeared. I asked Uncle Damon what happened. "Sometimes people aren't who they pretend to be," he said simply. "Sometimes they need to be reminded of that." Years later, I learned that Mr. Chen had been arrested in another state for possession of child pornography. Uncle Damon had somehow known before anyone else. When I was 12, bullies at school started targeting me for my secondhand clothes and weird science facts. I came home with a black eye, claiming I'd walked into a door. Uncle Damon looked at me for a long moment. "What really happened?" he asked quietly. I told him about Troy and his friends, how they'd cornered me by the dumpsters, how they'd laughed when I fell and scraped my palms on the asphalt, how they'd promised worse things were coming if I didn't start bringing them my lunch money. Uncle Damon nodded slowly. The next day, the bullying stopped completely. The 3 boys who'd been tormenting me suddenly developed an intense interest in leaving me alone. They'd cross hallways to avoid me. One transferred schools. Troy approached me weeks later, his face pale. "Your uncle talked to my dad," he whispered. I don't know what he said, but my dad looked scared for the first time in my life. He told me if I ever bothered you again, he'd send me to military school in Alaska. I never asked Uncle Damon what he'd done. I was afraid to know. The neighborhood changed when he moved in. Mrs. Peterson stopped complaining about our dog barking. The teenagers who used to tag our fence found somewhere else to vandalize. Even the Jehovah's Witnesses stopped coming to our door. Dad called it the Uncle Damon effect, but late at night I'd hear him pacing in the basement, sometimes talking on the phone in hushed, urgent tones. Once, I snuck down and caught a glimpse of him cleaning blood off his knuckles. He saw me watching and just said he'd cut himself fixing something. The lie sat heavy between us. When I was 13, I started noticing other things. How Uncle Damon would disappear for days at a time without explanation. How he'd come back with bruises he claimed were from work accidents. How he knew things about people in our neighborhood that he shouldn't have known. Like when Mrs. Rodriguez's husband started hitting her. Uncle Damon knew before she ever showed up at our door with a black eye. He'd already been researching domestic violence shelters and legal aid resources. Or when the Johnsons' teenage son started dealing drugs from their garage. Uncle Damon somehow intercepted the drug shipment before it arrived. The son never knew why his supplier suddenly stopped returning his calls. Uncle Damon had a network of information that extended far beyond what an unemployed ex-con should have access to. He knew people, dangerous people who owed him favors or feared his disapproval. When I was 15, I overheard my parents fighting about him. "He can't stay here forever," Mom hissed. "What if he brings his problems to our door?" "He is our problem," Dad shot back. "He's my brother. And those people he testified against, don't forget." That was the first time I learned Uncle Damon had been a witness in some kind of trial, that he'd put dangerous people in prison, that those people had friends who might come looking for revenge. Suddenly, all the warnings made sense. They weren't trying to protect me from Uncle Damon. They were trying to protect me from the consequences of Uncle Damon. The fear in my parents' voices was real, but it wasn't fear of what Uncle Damon might do to us. It was fear of what might happen to us because of what Uncle Damon had already done. I started paying attention differently. I noticed how Uncle Damon always parked his car facing the street, engine toward the exit, how he never sat with his back to doors, how he knew the exact time the mailman arrived, when the neighbors left for work, which cars belonged on our street and which didn't. He was watching, always watching, like a sentry guarding something precious. The basement became his war room. I caught glimpses of maps, police scanners, and weapons I couldn't identify. He'd installed security cameras around our house that my parents pretended not to see, motion sensors in the yard, reinforced locks on all the doors. Our house was becoming a fortress, and Uncle Damon was its sole defender. I began sneaking down to watch him work. He had files spread across tables, photos of men with dead eyes and expensive suits, newspaper clippings about unsolved murders and missing witnesses, phone numbers written in code on scraps of paper. One night, I got brave enough to ask questions. "Who are these people?" I whispered, pointing to the photos. Uncle Damon looked up from his police scanner, startled. He'd been so focused he hadn't heard me coming. "People who don't like that, I told the truth about them," he said simply. "What truth?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "That they hurt children," he finally said. "That they sold drugs to kids. That they made people disappear who got in their way." "Why did you tell?" I asked. "Because someone had to. And because I used to work for them." The admission hung in the air between us like a confession. "I was a bad person," he continued. "I did things I can never take back. But when they started killing families, killing kids who saw too much, I couldn't pretend anymore that the money was worth it." "So you became a witness," I said. "I became a target," he corrected. "There's a difference." Over the following months, Uncle Damon started explaining more. How witness protection had failed him. How the marshals couldn't keep him safe from people with unlimited resources and long memories. How he'd been forced to go underground and fight back on his own terms. "They think I'm in hiding," he told me one night while cleaning a handgun I didn't know he owned. "But I'm not hiding. I'm hunting." The revelation should have terrified me. Instead, it explained everything. Uncle Damon wasn't just a witness running from his past. He was actively working to eliminate the threats against him, against us. I learned that Uncle Damon had been what he called a cleaner, someone who made problems disappear for people with enough money to pay for the service. Not just murder, though that was part of it. Intimidation, blackmail, kidnapping, whatever it took to protect his clients' interests. He'd been very good at his job, too good. When his employers decided to expand into human trafficking and child exploitation, Uncle Damon had drawn a line he couldn't cross. The first family he'd been ordered to eliminate had included twin girls, age 6. Uncle Damon was supposed to make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. Instead, he'd helped them disappear into witness protection, then turned his considerable skills against his former employers. The FBI had been trying to penetrate Vincent Torino's organization for decades. Uncle Damon handed them everything they needed in exchange for immunity and a new identity. But new identities only work when the people hunting you follow rules. Torino's organization didn't follow rules. 3 safe houses had been compromised, 2 federal marshals had been killed. Uncle Damon had been forced to realize that the only way to truly protect himself was to eliminate every person with a reason to hunt him. That's when he'd started his own war. The first real test came when I was 16. I'd been walking home from school when a car started following me, slowly, deliberately. The driver wore sunglasses and kept pace with my walking speed. Every time I stopped, the car stopped. When I turned corners, it turned too. Terror crept up my spine like ice water. I ducked into a convenience store and called Uncle Damon. He answered before the first ring finished. "Where are you?" His voice was sharp, focused. I told him about the car, about the driver, about the sick feeling in my stomach that this wasn't coincidence. "Stay exactly where you are," he said. "Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming." Through the store window, I watched the car idle across the street. The driver's head turned toward the store. Even through his sunglasses, I felt his eyes on me. Uncle Damon arrived in under 3 minutes. I saw him before I heard him. One moment the street was empty except for the suspicious car. The next moment, Uncle Damon was beside the driver's window. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see the driver's body language change. Confident became nervous. Nervous became terrified. Within 30 seconds, the car peeled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. Uncle Damon walked into the store like nothing had happened. "Ready to go home?" he asked casually. The ride back was silent except for the police scanner crackling in his dashboard. Uncle Damon's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but his voice stayed calm. "Probably just some creep," he said. "But we're going to change your route home from now on." That night, I heard him on the phone again. Longer conversations this time. More urgent. I caught fragments through the basement door. "They found us. Need to move the package. How long do we have?" I understood then that I was the package. The security around our house intensified overnight. Uncle Damon installed new cameras. Motion detectors appeared in every room. He started walking me to and from school, staying far enough back that my friends wouldn't notice but close enough to intervene if needed. One morning, I found him passed out at the kitchen table, still holding his gun. He'd been awake for 3 days straight, monitoring threats I couldn't see. "You can't protect me forever," I told him. He looked at me with exhausted eyes. "Watch me," he said. But the strain was showing. Uncle Damon was losing weight. His hands shook when he thought no one was looking. He'd started talking to himself, working through scenarios where every outcome ended badly. Mom and Dad pretended not to notice, but I caught them whispering about intervention and forced hospitalization. They were scared of Uncle Damon, but they were more scared of what would happen to us without him. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. I woke up to Uncle Damon shaking me gently. It was still dark outside. His face was grim. "We need to go," he whispered. "Right now." I didn't argue. Something in his voice told me this wasn't negotiable. We crept through the house without waking my parents. Uncle Damon led me to a car I'd never seen before parked 2 blocks away. "Where are we going?" I asked as he started the engine. "Somewhere safe," he said. "There are people coming. People who want to hurt you to get to me." The safe house was a cabin an hour outside the city. No electricity, no phone service. Just Uncle Damon, a box of weapons, and enough supplies for a week. "How long do we stay here?" I asked. "Until they're all dead," he replied matter-of-factly. That's when I realized Uncle Damon wasn't just protecting me anymore. He was preparing for war. Over the next 3 days, I learned things about my uncle that changed everything. How he'd been a contract killer before becoming a witness. How he'd murdered 17 people for money. How his testimony had been part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. The gentleman who'd taught me card tricks had blood on his hands that would never wash clean. But I also learned why he turned. How his last assignment had been a family. A father who'd witnessed a drug deal. A mother who'd tried to protect her children. Kids who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I couldn't do it, he told me on the second night, staring into the campfire. I stood in their living room with a gun pointed at a 6-year-old girl, and I couldn't pull the trigger. What happened? I asked. I killed the people who'd hired me instead, he said simply. Then I called the FBI and offered to trade everything I knew for a chance to disappear. But you didn't disappear, I pointed out. No, he agreed. I got attached. On the third day, Uncle Damon received a call that changed everything. The caller was someone named Torres, apparently one of Uncle Damon's old contacts who'd gone legitimate. He was calling to warn Uncle Damon that a contract had been put out on our entire family. Not just you, Torres said, his voice crackling through the burner phone. All of them. The parents, the brother, the kid. 200,000 for proof of death. Uncle Damon's face went white. Who authorized it? He asked. Torino's nephew, Torres replied. Kid's trying to prove himself by finishing what his uncle started. Uncle Damon hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. I thought it was over, he said quietly. I thought I'd gotten them all. What do we do now? I asked. Uncle Damon looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Defeat. I don't know, he admitted. There are too many of them. Too many people who want to make a name for themselves by killing Vincent Torino's killer. But then something shifted in his expression. The defeat hardened into something else. Something cold and determined. Actually, he said slowly, I do know what to do. I just hoped I'd never have to do it. What? I asked. I have to stop being the hunted, he said, and start being the hunter again. On the fourth day, Uncle Damon's phone buzzed with a coded message. He read it and smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. It's starting, he said. My old team is coming together. Team? I asked. Uncle Damon had never mentioned having partners. There are others like me, he explained. People who worked for Torino and then turned. People who've been hiding, running, trying to stay alive. We've decided to stop running. Over the next few hours, I learned about Uncle Damon's network. Former assassins, corrupt cops who'd found their conscience, government agents who'd been burned by their own agencies. All of them had been living in the shadows, afraid to act because acting meant revealing themselves. But the contract on my family had changed the equation. If they were all going to be hunted anyway, they might as well go down fighting. Uncle Damon's plan was simple and terrifying. Instead of waiting for Torino's organization to pick them off one by one, they were going to strike first, simultaneously. Every major player in the organization would die on the same night. It would be a massacre. Are you sure this will work? I asked. Uncle Damon checked his weapons one final time. No, he said honestly, but it's the only chance we have. We drove back to the city that afternoon, but not to our house. Uncle Damon took me to a hotel across town and registered us under fake names. You're going to stay here, he told me. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear on the news, you stay in this room until I come back. What if you don't come back? I asked. Then you call this number, he said, handing me a card. Tell them you're package 7. They'll take care of you. Package 7? I asked. Uncle Damon kissed my forehead. You're not just my niece, he said. You're my assignment. My job is to keep you alive, no matter what. He left that night at midnight. I watched from the hotel window as he disappeared into the darkness, knowing I might never see him again. The next 12 hours were the longest of my life. I watched the news obsessively, waiting for reports of violence. I called our house repeatedly, but no one answered. I stared at the card Uncle Damon had given me, wondering if I should use it. Then at 3 p.m. the next day, every news channel in the city erupted with breaking news. A coordinated attack on organized crime had left 17 people dead across 5 locations. Police were calling it the most significant blow to organized crime in the city's history. The FBI was taking credit for what they claimed was a years-long undercover operation. But I knew the truth. Uncle Damon and his team had done the impossible. They'd eliminated an entire criminal organization in a single night. The hotel room phone rang at 4 p.m. It's done. Uncle Damon's voice was exhausted but triumphant. All of them. They can't hurt anyone anymore. Are you okay? I asked. I'm alive, he said. That's more than I expected. Are you coming to get me? I asked. Not yet, he said. I need to make sure it's really over. Give me 24 hours. Those 24 hours stretched into a week, then 2 weeks, then a month. I started to think Uncle Damon was never coming back, but he did. 6 weeks later, he walked into our house like he'd just been out buying groceries. He looked older, scarred. There were stories written in the lines around his eyes that I knew I'd never hear. It's over, he told my parents. Really over this time. The people who wanted to hurt us are all dead or in prison. Mom cried. Dad hugged his brother for the first time in years. My older brother put away his baseball bat. But I could see that Uncle Damon was different. The war had changed him. He'd won, but the victory had cost him something essential. Over the following months, Uncle Damon tried to return to normal life. He got his job at the auto repair shop. He started dating Patricia, the librarian. He went back to fixing bike chains and teaching card tricks. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch him staring out windows, still watching, still waiting. Old habits die hard, he told me once. Especially when those habits kept your family alive. I asked him why he'd risked everything to protect us, why he hadn't just disappeared completely and let us fend for ourselves. He looked at me like the answer was obvious. Because family isn't about blood, he said. It's about who you'd kill for, and who you'd die for. The conversation we'd both been avoiding finally happened on my 18th birthday. I found Uncle Damon in the basement, not working on anything, just sitting in his chair, staring at the wall where his maps used to hang. I need to know, I said. How many people did you kill? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Before I became a witness? 23. During the war? 47. 70 people, I said, testing how the number felt in my mouth. 70 monsters, he corrected. Every single one of them had blood on their hands. Children's blood. Women's blood. Innocent people who'd been in the wrong place or seen too much or tried to do the right thing. Does that make it okay? I asked. He shook his head. Nothing makes it okay, but it makes it necessary. I sat with that for a while. Do you regret it? I finally asked. Uncle Damon looked at me with those tired eyes I'd learned to recognize. I regret that it had to be done, he said. I regret that the world is the kind of place where people like me have to exist. But I don't regret doing it. Why not? Because you're alive. Because your parents are alive. Because somewhere out there, kids are growing up who would have been sold into slavery or murdered or worse if I hadn't stopped the people responsible. He stood up and walked to where his gun safe used to be. The difference between me and them is that I don't enjoy it. I don't take trophies or brag about body counts. I do what needs to be done and then I try to forget about it. Can you? I asked. Forget about it? No, he said simply. But I can live with it. Because the alternative was watching evil people hurt good people while I did nothing. That night, for the first time in years, Uncle Damon slept through the night without nightmares. I know because I stayed awake listening for them. The sound of peaceful sleep was somehow more unsettling than the sound of screaming. But Uncle Damon's peace didn't last long. 3 months after the war ended, new threats started emerging. Not from Torino's organization, which was effectively extinct, but from people trying to fill the power vacuum. Younger criminals with more ambition than sense. Foreign organizations looking to expand into Torino's territory. Wannabe gangsters who thought killing Uncle Damon would establish their reputation. The war was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. I watched Uncle Damon's paranoia return gradually. First, he started carrying a gun again. Then he reinstalled the security cameras. Then he began sleeping in shifts, never allowing himself to be unconscious for more than 3 hours at a time. The cycle was starting all over again. But this time, I was old enough to understand what was happening, and I was old enough to do something about it. I started researching Uncle Damon's past more thoroughly, not just his criminal history, but his personal history, his childhood, his military service, the events that had shaped him into the man he'd become. What I found explained everything. Uncle Damon had been born into violence. His father had been an abusive alcoholic who'd beaten him and my dad regularly. His mother had died when he was 12, leaving him to protect my dad from their father's rage. At 16, Uncle Damon had killed his own father in self-defense during one particularly brutal beating. The court had ruled it justifiable homicide, but Uncle Damon had been placed in juvenile detention anyway. That's where he'd learned to fight, to survive, to become the kind of person who could do terrible things when necessary. When he'd aged out of the system, the military had seemed like his only option. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a special operations soldier, learning skills that would later make him valuable to people like Vincent Torino. After his discharge, Uncle Damon had struggled to find legitimate work. His skill set was too specialized, too violent, too necessary for people who lived outside the law. Vincent Torino had offered him a choice. Use your skills for us, or starve on the streets. Uncle Damon had chosen survival. For 15 years, he'd been Torino's most reliable problem solver. He'd done things that would have broken most people. But he'd also sent money home to support my dad through college and medical school. He'd paid for my grandmother's cancer treatments. He'd quietly funded scholarships for kids from broken homes. Even as a killer, Uncle Damon had been trying to save people. The revelation that finally broke his loyalty to Torino hadn't been philosophical. It had been personal. Torino had ordered him to eliminate a family that included a little girl who reminded Uncle Damon of me. Same age, same curious eyes, same dreams of becoming a scientist. Uncle Damon had seen himself in that girl's father, trying desperately to protect his family from monsters. He'd seen me in that girl, innocent and trusting and completely unaware of the evil that surrounded her. He couldn't pull the trigger. Instead, he'd helped the family disappear, then spent the next 4 years systematically destroying everyone who'd put them in danger. Uncle Damon hadn't just been protecting us from his enemies. He'd been protecting every innocent family from the kind of people he used to be. Understanding his history changed how I saw everything. Uncle Damon wasn't a killer who'd developed a conscience. He was a protector who'd been forced to become a killer. Every warning my family had given me about staying away from Uncle Damon had been based on fear of what he might do. But Uncle Damon's greatest fear was what he'd already done. He was terrified that his violence would somehow infect me, that I'd grow up thinking murder was an acceptable solution to problems. He'd spent years trying to keep me at arm's length, not because he didn't love me, but because he loved me too much to risk corrupting me. The irony was that Uncle Damon's attempts to protect me from his violence had actually taught me the most important lesson of my life, that violence should be a last resort, not a first choice. By showing me what it costs to live with blood on your hands, he'd ensured I'd never want that for myself. Armed with this understanding, I made a decision that would change both our lives. I confronted Uncle Damon about the new threats, about his returning paranoia, about the fact that he was preparing for another war. This has to stop, I told him. You can't spend the rest of your life killing people who want to kill you. What else am I supposed to do? He asked. They won't stop coming. Yes, they will, I said. If you give them what they want. What do you mean? He asked. I'd been researching more than just Uncle Damon's history. I'd been researching his enemies, what they really wanted, what would make them stop hunting him. They don't want revenge, I explained. They want reputation. They want to be known as the person who killed Vincent Torino's killer. So? Uncle Damon said. So we give them that reputation without giving them the reality, I said. My plan was simple but dangerous. Uncle Damon would fake his own death, publicly, dramatically, in a way that would make his killers instant legends in the criminal underworld. But instead of actually dying, he'd disappear completely. New identity, new life, new chance to be the person he'd always wanted to be instead of the person circumstances had forced him to become. It's risky, I admitted. If anyone finds out you're still alive, the hunting starts all over again. Uncle Damon considered this for a long time. What about you? He asked. What about your parents? How do I protect you if I'm officially dead? You don't, I said. We protect ourselves, the way normal families do. Uncle Damon looked at me like I'd suggested we all move to Mars. You don't understand, he said. The world is full of predators. Without me watching, they'll what? I interrupted. Live normal lives like billions of other people who don't have personal assassins watching over them? Uncle Damon fell silent. You've taught me everything I need to know, I continued. How to recognize danger, how to avoid it, how to defend myself if necessary. But most importantly, you've taught me that violence should be a last resort, not a way of life. Over the following weeks, we worked out the details. Uncle Damon would stage his death during a confrontation with one of the young criminals trying to establish a reputation. The criminal would get credit for the kill, elevating his status and discouraging others from continuing the hunt. Uncle Damon would become David Chen, a quiet mechanic with no criminal history and no connection to his former life. The plan worked perfectly. The news reported Uncle Damon's death as the end of an era. The young criminal who'd allegedly killed him became an instant legend. Other criminals stopped hunting a dead man. David Chen got a job at an auto repair shop in a small town 3 hours away. He started dating a librarian named Patricia, who thought his only crime was having too many overdue books. And I got my uncle back. Not the paranoid warrior who'd spent years expecting death around every corner, but the gentle man who'd taught me card tricks and believed in my dreams. We still see each other regularly. I drive to his town for holidays. He comes to my college graduation. We play poker with stale crackers and pretend he lets me win. The difference is that now, when Uncle Damon looks out windows, he's not watching for threats. He's just enjoying the view. Everyone had warned me about Uncle Damon because they were trying to protect me, but they'd been protecting me from the wrong thing. They'd been afraid he'd corrupt me with violence, when really, he'd been shielding me from a violence that had nothing to do with who he was and everything to do with who he'd been forced to become. The person everyone warned me about had been protecting me all along. Sometimes the most dangerous people in your life are dangerous precisely because they're the only ones willing to stand between you and real danger. I'm in graduate school now, studying forensic science at the State University. I'm using what Uncle Damon taught me about recognizing patterns and understanding human nature to help solve crimes instead of commit them. When people ask about my family, I tell them about my Uncle David, who's a mechanic in a small town. I don't mention that he used to hunt monsters for a living. I don't explain that the gentlest man I know has blood on his hands that will never wash clean. Some truths are too heavy for casual conversation. But I sleep better knowing Uncle Damon is finally at peace. Because monsters are real, but so is redemption. Sometimes you need to become a monster to understand why you should choose to be human. The person everyone warned me about turned out to be the person I needed most. He just took the long way around to protecting me. Patricia doesn't know about Uncle Damon's past. She thinks David Chen is just a quiet mechanic with gentle hands and sad eyes. Sometimes I watch them together at family dinners, her laughing at his jokes, him relaxing in ways I'd never seen before. She's his redemption, his proof that people can change, his hope that the future can be different from the past. And I'm his legacy, his assurance that the violence stops with him. Last month, Uncle Damon asked if I wanted to know about the people he'd killed, their names, their crimes, what they'd done that had earned them a death sentence from a man who'd once been just like them. I told him no. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry. But I did ask him one more question. Was it worth it? All of it? The killing, the hiding, the years of violence? Uncle Damon looked at me working on my thesis, surrounded by textbooks and evidence analysis charts, preparing for a career dedicated to finding truth and serving justice. He smiled. Ask me in 20 years, he said. When you're using what I taught you to catch people like I used to be. I realized then that Uncle Damon hadn't just been protecting me from his enemies. He'd been protecting me from becoming like him. All those years of warnings and distance had been designed to keep me clean, to make sure I grew up believing in law and order and justice through proper channels. He'd killed 70 people so I'd never have to kill anyone. He'd become a monster so I could stay human. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The most violent man I'd ever known had raised me to be the most peaceful person I could be. His greatest victory wasn't surviving his war. It was making sure I'd never have to fight one. The warnings everyone gave me about Uncle Damon were right in a way. He was dangerous. He was violent. He was someone you shouldn't get too close to. But they were wrong about why. He wasn't dangerous because he might hurt me. He was dangerous because caring about me made him vulnerable, made him take risks, made him choose love over survival. In the end, the person everyone warned me about was the person who saved me. Not just from his enemies, but from a world that would have taught me that violence is the answer to every problem. Uncle Damon showed me that sometimes violence is necessary, but he made sure I understood that it should never be easy. The most important lesson he taught me wasn't how to fight. It was how to choose not to. Now when I visit Uncle Damon in his small town, we sit on his porch and watch the sunset. He tells me stories about his work at the garage, about Patricia's book club, about the normal life he's building with clean hands and a clear conscience. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with wonder, like he can't believe he helped create something good in a world full of darkness. You did it, I tell him during these moments. You broke the cycle. Uncle Damon always smiles when I say that, but there's still sadness in his eyes. The cycle's not broken until you have kids of your own, he says. Until you raise them without ever having to teach them how to kill. I understand what he means. Uncle Damon's father had beaten him. Uncle Damon had killed for money. But I'm studying to catch killers instead of being one. Each generation gets a little further from the violence. My children, if I have them, will grow up in a world where their biggest worry is homework and college applications. They'll never know that their great-uncle once had blood under his fingernails. They'll never learn to sleep with weapons within reach. That's Uncle Damon's real victory. Not the war he won, but the peace he made possible. 3 years into my graduate program, I get a call that changes everything. There's been a murder, my advisor says. The police need a forensic consultant, and they specifically asked for you. I'm flattered but confused. I'm still a student. There are plenty of more qualified experts available. The victim was David Chen, my advisor continues. Shot twice in the head outside his apartment. The detective said you knew him personally. The world stops. I drive to Uncle Damon's town in a haze of disbelief and terror. The crime scene is crawling with police. Yellow tape surrounds his apartment building. Blood stains the sidewalk where he fell. Detective Morrison, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, approaches me with gentle eyes. I'm sorry for your loss, she says. We understand David was your uncle. I nod, not trusting my voice. Can you think of anyone who might have wanted to hurt him? She asks. Any enemies? Any recent conflicts? I almost laugh. If only she knew. No, I managed to say. He was just a mechanic. He lived quietly. That's what everyone says, Detective Morrison replies. Model citizen. No criminal record, no debts, no angry ex-wives. It doesn't make sense. But it makes perfect sense to me. Someone had discovered Uncle Damon's true identity. Someone had realized that David Chen was actually the legendary killer who destroyed Vincent Torino's empire. The fake death hadn't worked. Uncle Damon's past had finally caught up with him. I examined the crime scene with professional detachment, trying to ignore the fact that this is my uncle's blood on the concrete. 2 gunshots to the head, professional execution, no witnesses, no security footage. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Patricia is devastated. She keeps asking me why someone would hurt David. What had he done to deserve this? Who could have hated such a gentleman? I comfort her while my mind races through possibilities. Who had found out? How had they tracked him down? Were my parents safe? Was I safe? That night, alone in Uncle Damon's apartment, I search for clues he might have left behind. The police have already been through everything, but they don't know what to look for. I find it hidden inside an old coffee can in the back of his closet. A letter addressed to me in Uncle Damon's handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Not David Chen dead, but really dead this time. I always knew someone would figure it out eventually. There are too many people who remember my face, too many loose ends that can't stay loose forever. I want you to know that the last 5 years as David Chen were the happiest of my life. For the first time since I was a child, I got to be normal. I got to fix cars and date a librarian and worry about ordinary things like paying rent on time. You gave me that gift when you suggested I fake my death. You gave me a chance to be the person I always wanted to be instead of the person I had to become. But more importantly, you proved that the violence really can stop. You're going to graduate school. You're going to help people. You're going to build a life that has nothing to do with the darkness that consumed me. If something happens to me, don't try to find my killer. Don't seek revenge. Don't become what I was. Just live your life. Be happy. Prove that all the blood on my hands was worth something. The person everyone warned you about was trying to protect you. From the world. From evil people. From me. But mostly from becoming me. You don't need protecting anymore. You know how to recognize danger and how to avoid it. You know that violence should be a last resort, not a first choice. You know that the most important battles are fought with minds, not weapons. Take care of Patricia if you can. She never knew who I really was, but she loved who I tried to become. That love was real, even if David Chen wasn't. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is dangerous because they love you enough to become a monster so you don't have to. I love you, kid. Uncle Damon P.S. Check behind the water heater. Behind the water heater, I find a safe I didn't know existed. Inside are documents that make my blood run cold. Photographs of me walking to class. Of my parents leaving work. Of my brother at his job. Someone had been watching all of us for months. There's also a note, not in Uncle Damon's handwriting. We know who you are. We know what your uncle did to our people. David Chen is dead. But that's not enough. Blood for blood. Family for family. You have 48 hours to disappear or you'll join him. Uncle Damon hadn't been caught by accident. He'd been found because someone was using us as bait. They'd been watching our family, waiting for him to make contact. He'd known he was walking into a trap when he came to my graduation. Known he was signing his death warrant by maintaining contact with us. But he'd come anyway because he couldn't stand the thought of missing such an important moment in my life. Uncle Damon had died because he loved us too much to stay away. I call my parents immediately. Pack a bag, I tell them. Leave town tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Why? Dad asks. What's happening? David Chen wasn't really David Chen, I say. And now someone wants to hurt us because of who he really was. There's a long silence. We'll leave in an hour, Dad finally says. I realize then that my parents had known all along. They'd been waiting for this call for 5 years. The next 48 hours are a blur of movement and fear. I contact the detective handling Uncle Damon's case and tell her I've received threats. She arranges police protection, but we both know it won't be enough. Professional killers don't care about police protection. On the second night, they come for me. I'm staying in a safe house when the power goes out. 3 men in tactical gear enter through windows and doors simultaneously. They move like Uncle Damon had moved that night in our living room years ago. Professional, efficient, lethal. But Uncle Damon had taught me more than just how to recognize danger. He'd taught me how to survive it. I activate the panic alarm he'd made me install in every place I lived. I use the escape route he'd made me practice in every building I entered. I employ the evasion techniques he'd drilled into me during our weekend camping trips. Most importantly, I remember what he'd always told me. The goal isn't to win a fight. The goal is to avoid having one. I escaped through a basement tunnel Uncle Damon had shown me years earlier. Emergency exit routes, he'd called them, just in case. I emerged 3 blocks away and called the one number Uncle Damon had made me memorize but never use. Torres, I say when a gravelly voice answers. This is package 7. There's a pause. Where are you? Torres asks. I tell him. Stay put, he says. I'm coming. Torres turns out to be a stocky man in his 60s with kind eyes and scarred hands. He looks like he could be someone's grandfather, but he moves like Uncle Damon had moved. Like violence is always an option. Damon told me about you, he says as we drive through the night. Said you were the reason he kept fighting. What happens now? I ask. Now we end this. Torres replies, the way Damon would have wanted us to. Over the next week, I learned that Uncle Damon's network had never really disbanded. Torres and 6 others had been living quiet lives, but they'd stayed in contact. When Uncle Damon died, they'd activated contingency plans he'd put in place years earlier. Plans to protect me. The people hunting my family think they're dealing with scared civilians. They don't realize they're about to face 7 of the most dangerous people who ever lived. Uncle Damon's final gift to me isn't just the escape routes and survival skills he taught me. It's the knowledge that even in death, he's still protecting me. The war that follows is swift and brutal. I don't participate, but I hear the reports. Bodies found in cars, mysterious accidents, people who simply disappear without a trace. Within 2 weeks, everyone involved in Uncle Damon's murder is dead. The threat against my family is eliminated. Uncle Damon's real death is finally avenged, but the cost is 7 more lives lost to violence. 7 more people who chose to become monsters so I could remain human. Torres visits me after it's over. It's done, he says simply. You're safe now. Your family is safe. What about you? I ask. What happens to Uncle Damon's network now? We go back to being grandfathers and mechanics and librarians, Torres says with a sad smile. This was our last job. Damon made us promise. I attend Uncle Damon's real funeral a month later. Just me, Patricia, and 7 elderly people who'd known him by his true name. We don't speak about what he'd done or who he'd killed. We talk about the man who'd fixed bicycles and taught card tricks and believed in second chances. Patricia cries for David Chen, the gentle mechanic she'd loved. The others cry for Damon, the killer who'd found redemption. I cry for my uncle, who'd spent his entire life trying to protect people from monsters like himself. At the graveside, Torres approaches me one final time. He wanted me to give you this, Torres says, handing me a small box. Inside is Uncle Damon's deck of cards, the same deck he'd used to teach me poker when I was 8. There's a note tucked between the cards. The most important game I ever taught you wasn't poker. It was how to bluff your way through danger without becoming dangerous yourself. Keep playing that game. Win it for both of us. I graduate with my doctorate 2 years later. My dissertation is on patterns of violence and organized crime, using Uncle Damon's case as a study in how criminal organizations eventually destroy themselves through escalating retribution. I don't mention that my primary source was personal experience. At my graduation, I look into the audience and see my parents beaming with pride. My brother and his new wife, Patricia, who still doesn't know the whole truth but loves me because Uncle Damon had loved me. The empty seat where Uncle Damon should have been sitting isn't really empty. I can feel his presence, his pride, his relief that I'd made it this far without blood on my hands. Everyone had warned me about Uncle Damon because they were trying to protect me, but they'd been protecting me from the wrong thing. They'd been afraid he'd corrupt me with violence, when really, he'd been shielding me from a violence that had nothing to do with who he was, and everything to do with who he'd been forced to become. The person everyone warned me about had been protecting me all along. Sometimes the most dangerous people in your life are dangerous precisely because they're the only ones willing to stand between you and real danger. I'm Dr. Patricia Chen now. I chose to take Patricia's last name when I legally changed mine, honoring both the woman who'd loved Uncle Damon and the identity he'd died protecting. I work for the FBI using everything Uncle Damon taught me about recognizing patterns and understanding criminal psychology to catch people like he used to be. The irony isn't lost on me. The man who'd spent years killing criminals had raised someone who now spends her life catching them. But that's exactly what Uncle Damon had wanted. He'd broken the cycle of violence by ensuring the next generation would choose justice over vengeance, law over chaos, healing over hurting. When people ask about my family, I tell them about my uncle who taught me that the most important lesson in life is knowing when not to fight. I don't mention that he'd learned that lesson by fighting too much. I don't explain that his greatest victory was making sure I'd never have to. Some truths are too heavy for casual conversation, but I carry them anyway, because they're the foundation of who I've become. Every case I solve, every criminal I help catch, every victim I help find justice, it's all built on the understanding that violence should be a last resort, not a first choice. Uncle Damon had spent his life becoming a monster so I could learn how to stay human. The person everyone warned me about turned out to be the person who saved me. He just took the long way around to protecting me. And in the end, that protection worked. I'm alive. I'm safe. I'm using what he taught me to make the world a little bit better instead of a little bit worse. The violence stopped with him, exactly as he'd planned. The cycle is finally broken.